In the heart of the vast African plains, under a sky stitched with stars and the steady rhythm of drums in the distance, there exists a tale too heavy for children and too haunting to forget. It is not written in books or carved on stones, but lives on the tongues of elders who speak it with solemn eyes and lowered voices around flickering fire pits. Their faces, carved by time and wisdom, carry the weight of a warning, that not all riches are blessings and not every sin goes unanswered. This is a story of betrayal, greed, and the kind of justice that moves through the wind and water, untouched by human hands. The villagers say the ancestors watch over everything, especially when hearts grow dark. They say when blood is spilled with greed in the heart, the earth itself remembers, and something always comes to collect what was unjustly taken. There was once a young man whose hunger for gold outgrew his sense of family, outgrew his own humanity. He wasn't born evil, but envy had a way of twisting even the softest spirits into something monstrous. And it was his sister, gentle and radiant as the morning sun, who paid the price for his ambition. In a moment soaked in silence and shadows, he raised the blade, not against an enemy but against his own blood. They say he offered her finger to a spirit for gold, and gold he received. But the next morning something was missing, not from her but from him. His hand, once proud and grasping, had vanished without a trace, without a wound, as if the spirits had come quietly in the night to balance the scales. The village of Olangi lay nestled in the crook of a vast river, its roots deep in the rich soil of the earth, surrounded by dense forests and the soft hum of nature's endless cycle. It was a place where the sun's golden rays would filter through the branches of ancient trees, casting long shadows that danced on the earth like spirits watching over the people. The village thrived under the watchful eyes of elders who passed down stories and wisdom, their voices echoing around the fires at night, as they taught the young about the spirits that lived in the land, the water, and the skies. Olangi was not just a village, it was a living organism, its heartbeat in the songs of the children, the labor of the elders, and the work of the men and women who shaped its existence. The villagers lived in harmony with nature, tending to the fertile fields where crops flourished, the river that supplied them with both water and fish, and the forest that offered herbs and materials for healing. Their spiritual beliefs were deeply entwined with the natural world. Every tree, every stone, and every animal was seen as a manifestation of a spirit, a messenger between the living and the ancestors who watched over them from the realms beyond. The villagers would perform rituals and offer sacrifices to appease these spirits, ensuring the health and prosperity of the community. At the heart of the village were the families, tightly woven together through generations of kinship, trust, and shared history. In each home, children learned the old ways from their parents, and as they grew, they carried the stories of their ancestors with them like a cloak of protection. In this community, a person's worth was measured by their deeds, their respect for the land, and their ability to contribute to the harmony of the village. Among the families of Olangi was the family of Kofi and Adama. Kofi, the elder of the two, was a boy of strong build and keen ambition. From a young age, his eyes were always set on the future, but unlike the other children who played and laughed, Kofi was often seen standing apart, lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. He was a boy of few words, his quiet nature betraying a mind that was constantly working, calculating. Adama, his sister, was the complete opposite. She was a radiant soul, her laughter like the tinkling of a bell, her heart as open as the sky. Her beauty was not just in her appearance but in her kindness and her unwavering connection to the spirits. She had a gift for seeing beyond the physical world, sensing things others could not. The elders said that she was blessed, a child of the earth itself. Their parents, who had once been deeply in love, had died under tragic circumstances, leaving the children to fend for themselves. Adama's mother had been taken by a fever that spread through the village one cruel year, and the pain of her loss weighed heavily on both siblings. Their father, heartbroken and grieving, found little solace in the home that now felt empty and hollow. In his despair, he remarried soon after the passing of Adama's mother. His new wife, a woman named Akua, was a striking figure, but her beauty masked the bitterness that lay beneath. Akua had no children of her own, but she had her own ambitions, and with the union came a change in the dynamics of the family. Akua's presence was felt immediately. She was kind at first, as new wives often are, but there was something cold about her smile, something distant in her eyes. Kofi, who had always been the quieter of the two children, seemed to adapt to the new family arrangement. He sought to please Akua, eager to show his worth in the eyes of his father. But Adama, whose heart was still raw with the loss of her mother, felt a strange unease in Akua's presence. The new wife tried to win her over with gifts and false affection, but Adama remained distant, her heart unwilling to accept the change. As the months passed, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Kofi, driven by a desire to prove himself and gain favor with his new mother, began to spend more time with Akua, while Adama withdrew into herself, becoming increasingly isolated. At first, the rivalry between them was subtle, hidden beneath the surface like a current running deep under still water. Kofi would go to Akua for advice, and she would smile and tell him what he wanted to hear, fueling the fire of ambition that burned within him. Adama, on the other hand, began to notice the way Akua's smile seemed to fade whenever she looked at her. The love and attention that Kofi received from their father only deepened Adama's sense of loss. It wasn't long before Kofi started showing signs of jealousy. It was an emotion that had always lurked in the corners of his heart, waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. Though he never spoke of it aloud, Kofi began to resent the way Adama's beauty and grace had earned her the favor of the villagers. She was loved by everyone, admired for her kindness and her deep connection to the spirits. Adama's presence in the village seemed to bring warmth, while Kofi's ambition and growing bitterness drove him further from the peace of their home. As the seasons changed, so did the bond between the siblings. What was once a deep connection, founded on shared memories and experiences, now became strained and fragile. Kofi's envy began to take root, and though he never expressed it outright, Adama could feel the shift in his energy. It was as if something had clouded his spirit, making him distant, cold. What had once been playful teasing between siblings turned into sharp words and silent glares. And as the days grew longer, so too did the distance between them, until they were no longer the close-knit siblings they once had been. Their father, lost in his own grief and the complexity of his new life, failed to see the growing tension between his children. He was too preoccupied with his own ambitions and responsibilities, and Akua, with her manipulative charm, knew how to keep him distracted. The cracks in the family deepened, unnoticed by the one person who could have prevented it. And so, the seeds of rivalry and resentment continued to grow, fed by the complexities of family life, the painful memories of loss, and the unspoken jealousy that lurked in Kofi's heart. The story of Kofi and Adama was one that would soon spiral into something far darker, a story of greed and betrayal that would change the course of their lives forever. The village of Olanji had many legends, stories passed down through the generations, each one echoing the wisdom and warnings of their ancestors. Among these was a particularly sacred tale, one that was often told by the elders as the night deepened and the firelight flickered in the circle of listeners. It was the legend of the river spirit, a powerful and ancient being said to dwell deep within the currents of the great river that ran beside the village, a spirit both revered and feared. According to the legend, the river spirit was neither cruel nor kind, but a guardian of balance, watching over the life-giving waters and the land it nourished. It was said that the spirit blessed only those who were pure of heart, those who approached with respect and humility. To receive the river spirit's blessing, one had to offer something of great personal value, something that held deep meaning. It was not a gift to be taken lightly, and those who sought the spirit's favor had to be prepared for the consequences of what they offered. The river was sacred, its waters believed to hold the essence of life itself. The elders would speak of those who, in times of need, had journeyed to the river to perform the ritual. The pure-hearted were blessed with gold, a gift said to bring prosperity and abundance. But the gold was not an ordinary treasure. It was imbued with the spirit's power, capable of bringing both fortune and ruin. The villagers knew that wealth gained through the river spirit's blessing could only be used wisely, for any selfish desires or greed would lead to a curse far worse than the poverty one sought to escape. The river demanded balance, and its magic was not to be trifled with. The legend was not one that was spoken of lightly, for it carried with it a heavy warning. Those who sought the gold without truly understanding the spirit's intentions would be left with nothing but emptiness. The river's gold could only bring true happiness if it was earned through sacrifice and sincerity, and only those who gave selflessly would be granted the wealth they sought. Kofi, ever the ambitious and restless soul, heard the tale many times as he grew up. The legend took root in his heart, a seed of desire that would grow into an obsession. Unlike the other children who listened with awe and respect, Kofi's thoughts were consumed by the gold. To him, the tale was not one of caution or reverence but one of opportunity. He saw the river spirit not as a guardian but as a means to an end. Gold, in his eyes, was the answer to all of his problems. It would bring him the power, respect, and freedom he craved. It would elevate him above his simple life and give him the means to prove himself to the villagers, to his father, and most importantly to Akua, his stepmother, who he believed held the key to his success. Kofi spent his nights by the riverbank, staring into the dark waters, his mind racing with thoughts of what he could offer to the river spirit. He had nothing of value, at least nothing that seemed worthy of such a precious gift. His heart was not pure, his intentions clouded by ambition and jealousy. But he refused to accept that, to him, the only thing worth offering was his own desire for wealth. He had no understanding of the spirit's true nature, only the gold that he believed it could provide. And so he began to devise a plan, one that would lead him to the spirit's blessing no matter the cost. Adama, on the other hand, was not drawn to the river in the same way. She too had heard the legend many times, but her heart was in tune with the spirit of the land in a different way. While Kofi saw the river as a source of gold, Adama saw it as a place of healing and connection. She loved the river not for what it could give her, but for what it represented: the strength of the earth, the flow of life, and the memories of her late mother, who had taught her the ways of the spirits. To Adama, the river was sacred, not a place for selfish desires or greedy rituals. After her mother's death, Adama had found solace by the river, sitting quietly by its banks, listening to the whispers of the water and feeling the presence of her mother's spirit within the flow. She never thought of gold, nor did she ever feel the need to prove herself or gain favor with the spirits. Her connection to the land and the river was pure, her heart open to the wisdom of the ancestors who spoke through the wind and the water. She understood that the true gift of the river was not material wealth, but spiritual peace, and that the river gave what was needed, not necessarily what was wanted. But the more Kofi fixated on the gold, the more he began to distance himself from the pure intentions that Adama held. She saw the change in him, the growing obsession, and it saddened her. She tried to warn him, to tell him that the river spirit could not be manipulated for personal gain, but Kofi was deaf to her words. His hunger for wealth drowned out all other voices, and he refused to listen to his sister's wisdom. Adama's heart ached as she watched Kofi slip further away from the values that had once bound them together. She wished nothing more than for him to find peace, to understand the true meaning of the river's blessing. But she could not force him to see what she saw. All she could do was continue her quiet prayers by the river, asking the spirits for guidance, for healing, and for the strength to endure whatever might come. As Kofi's obsession with the gold grew, so too did the distance between him and Adama. While Kofi plotted and schemed, Adama remained steadfast in her belief that the river's power could not be controlled by human desires. It was not long before Kofi decided to take matters into his own hands, and his first step was to make the journey to the river alone. He would offer his sacrifice, his gift to the spirit, and in return he believed the spirit would give him the gold he so desperately craved. He had no idea that in seeking wealth through deceit, he would soon awaken a force far greater than he ever imagined. And so, Kofi's journey to the river began, driven by greed, unaware of the fate that awaited him. Adama, still by the river's edge, could feel the shift in the air, the growing tension between what was pure and what was corrupted. She knew that the time of reckoning was near, and that the river would soon reveal its true nature. But she also knew that the spirit of the land would not let Kofi's greed go unanswered. The river always balanced what was taken, and soon Kofi would learn the price of his desires. Kofi's obsession with the river spirit's gold had clouded his mind, consumed his every thought. In his heart he had already made up his mind: the ritual would work. The gold would be his. But there was a complication, something he had to address before he could take what he desired. Adama, his sister, would have to be involved. Though he had grown distant from her, he knew that in her purity and kindness, she could serve as the perfect decoy, an innocent offering to the river spirit, one that would allow him to receive the riches he so desperately wanted. The spirit demanded something of value, something precious, and Adama's innocence, her beauty, and her connection to the river would be the perfect price. Kofi approached her with a carefully crafted story, his voice sweet and filled with false concern. He told her of a dream he had, a vision that had come to him in the night, in which the river spirit had called him to perform a ritual with his sister. He spoke of the great blessings the ritual would bring to their family, how the spirits would smile upon them both and grant them prosperity. Adama, always trusting and eager to believe in the goodness of others, was hesitant at first, but her heart softened at the mention of the river and the promise of peace. "I've seen the signs, Adama," Kofi had said, his eyes bright with false sincerity. "The river calls to us both. It wishes to grant us a blessing, something that will protect our family forever. Together we can do this. You must come with me, my sister. Only by joining in this ritual will we unlock the spirit's true power." Adama, with her deep connection to the spirits and the land, felt the pull of the river. She had always believed that it was a place of healing, a sacred site where she could commune with the spirits of her ancestors. And though something in her heart whispered a warning, the words of her brother and the idea of unity and peace swayed her judgment. She agreed to go with him, trusting that Kofi's intentions were pure. She had no idea that her brother's mind had already become poisoned by his desire for wealth, that he had planned to betray her in the most horrific way imaginable. That night, under the thick cloak of darkness, Kofi and Adama made their way to the river. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the hum of nocturnal creatures, their calls echoing through the dense trees. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the river's surface, which shimmered like liquid silver. Kofi led the way, his steps deliberate, but his heart raced with anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when his greed would be satisfied. When they reached the riverbank, Kofi pretended to prepare for the ritual, carefully arranging stones and leaves in a circle as he had seen in the elders' tales. Adama, though still a bit uneasy, trusted her brother's guidance. She sat down beside him, gazing out over the water, her thoughts drifting as she listened to the sound of the river flowing peacefully in the night. The ritual was to be simple, Kofi had told her. She was to offer a prayer to the river spirit, and in return they would both be blessed. But as the ritual progressed, Kofi's actions grew more and more erratic. He asked Adama to close her eyes, to focus on the spirits, and to open her heart to the river's blessings. She did so willingly, unaware that her brother's mind was consumed by something far darker. With each passing moment, Kofi's heart pounded louder in his chest. He had planned this for so long, rehearsed it in his mind again and again. He could almost taste the gold that would soon be his. And then, in one swift motion, Kofi struck. With a look of twisted determination on his face, Kofi drew a sharp, gleaming knife from beneath his cloak. His hand trembled, not with fear but with a perverse kind of excitement. Without warning he lunged toward Adama, his arm raised high. She gasped, her eyes flying open in shock as she realized what he was about to do. But it was too late. Adama's scream tore through the night as Kofi's blade cut through the air, slicing off her finger with a single, cruel motion. The pain was excruciating, and Adama fell to the ground, clutching her hand to her chest as blood poured from the wound. Her body trembled with shock, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but before she could fully comprehend the horror of what had just happened, Kofi had already moved away from her. With a look of fevered triumph, Kofi held up the severed finger, its blood still fresh, and whispered a prayer to the river. The spirit, he believed, would accept the offering. And as he knelt beside the riverbank, he watched, breathless, as the waters began to stir. The surface of the river rippled, as though something great was moving beneath its depths, and for a moment, Kofi thought he saw the faintest glimmer of gold beneath the water. His heart leaped in his chest. The river was responding. The spirit was accepting his offering. But Adama, writhing in agony, was not finished yet. Through her pain and confusion she managed to call out to her brother, her voice barely a whisper. "Kofi, why?" Kofi's face twisted in guilt and fear, but it was quickly replaced with cold resolve. He had to flee. He had taken what he wanted and there was no turning back now. In his mind the deed was done. The gold was his and it would all be worth it. He couldn't let anyone see what he had done, not Adama, not the villagers. He had to cover his tracks to make it seem as though the attack had come from something else. Adama, a wild animal. Kofi shouted in a panic, his voice laced with false urgency. A wild animal must have attacked you while we were performing the ritual. I couldn't stop it in time, but I'll get help. Just stay here, don't move. Without waiting for a response, Kofi turned and fled into the dark night, the bag of gold clenched tightly in his hand. As he ran, he could hear Adama's cries growing faint behind him, and though his heart pounded in his chest, he felt a perverse sense of triumph. He had won. But as he disappeared into the shadows, the night grew still again and the river, once a source of life, began to stir in a way that no one could predict. Adama's scream echoed through the darkness, a desperate plea for justice, but the river remained silent. The land had not yet taken its toll on the betrayer. But soon it would. And Kofi's fate would be sealed by the very gold he had stolen. Adama's world was a blur of pain and confusion, her body and mind battered by the betrayal she had endured at the hands of her own brother. The cold, bitter night seemed to stretch on forever as she lay by the riverbank, clutching her bleeding hand, unable to comprehend the depth of Kofi's cruelty. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, and her thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind of fear and disbelief. She had trusted him. He was her brother, her flesh and blood. How could he have done such a thing? The pain in her hand was unbearable, but it was the betrayal that hurt more, the realization that the brother she had always loved had chosen gold over family, over love, over everything they had shared. But despite the anguish that gripped her heart, something within Adama kept her from crying out for vengeance, from seeking justice with her own hands. She knew deep down that the spirits would take care of it. She had always believed in the power of the ancestors, in the balance of nature, and in the sacredness of the river. The river had been a part of her life since she was a child, a place where she could commune with the spirits of her mother and the elders. And though she could feel the weight of her suffering, she believed that the spirits would set things right. The river, the land, the ancestors, they would handle Kofi's betrayal. She didn't need to do anything more. She had already offered the ultimate sacrifice, her trust, her love, and her innocence. But as Adama's strength ebbed away, the sound of the river, once so constant and soothing, began to fade. It was as if the very spirit of the land had grown silent, mourning what had been done. The river, which had always flowed so freely, now seemed still, its once constant rush now reduced to a quiet trickle. Adama, weak and delirious from blood loss, could barely register the change. She was alone, and yet she felt the presence of something greater than herself, something watching over her, guiding her in silence. It was not long before a healer from the village, an elderly woman named Nana Kwaku, came upon Adama's broken form by the river. Nana Kwaku had always been attuned to the spiritual world, and she could sense when something was amiss. She had heard the distant cry of the river, and something within her told her to go to the riverbank. When she found Adama, her heart sank. The girl's hand was a mess of blood, her face pale and contorted in pain. But it was not just the wound that disturbed Nana Kwaku. It was the stillness of the river, the unnatural quiet that hung in the air, the sense of deep spiritual unrest that seemed to emanate from the land itself. The healer did not question Adama, nor did she demand an explanation. She could feel the weight of the trauma the girl had endured, and she knew that words might not be enough to heal her. Instead, Nana Kwaku gathered Adama in her arms, speaking soft prayers to the river and the spirits of the land as she carried her back to the village. The villagers had already begun to murmur, their voices filled with pity and concern for the girl who had been so cruelly injured. But none of them knew the truth of what had happened. None of them knew of Kofi's betrayal. To them, Adama's injury was a mystery, a wound inflicted by some unknown force, perhaps a wild animal, perhaps something darker. But they could not have imagined the depths of the treachery that had taken place. As Nana Kwaku nursed Adama back to health, the girl remained silent. She said nothing about her brother's actions, nothing about the gold, nothing about the ritual. She simply stared at the river in the distance, waiting for the spirits to speak, waiting for the balance to be restored. She believed that the land would right itself, that Kofi's cruelty would be answered in ways far beyond her comprehension. And in her silence, she clung to the hope that justice would come, not from her hands, but from the forces that governed the world around her. Adama's recovery was slow. The wound to her hand was grievous, and the emotional toll of her brother's betrayal left scars that would never fully heal. But over time, the healer's tender care and the quiet prayers of the village helped her regain her strength. Yet, despite the physical healing, there was a weight that hung over Adama, the weight of knowing what had truly happened, the weight of the injustice that had been done to her. The villagers, though sympathetic, never knew the full story. They believed the tale Kofi had spun, the story of a wild animal attack. And as Adama's recovery continued, the villagers began to shift their focus, offering her their kindness and pity, but not their understanding. They saw her as a victim, a girl who had suffered at the hands of some unseen force, but they never questioned the truth of her suffering. They never thought to ask how the injury had truly occurred, and so they allowed the mystery to remain unsolved. But there was one thing that could not be ignored: the river. The lifeblood of the village, the source of its spirit and sustenance, was no longer flowing as it once had. The river, which had always been a symbol of abundance and life, had become stagnant. The villagers noticed the change, though they could not fully comprehend its meaning. They whispered among themselves, wondering what had caused the river to stop flowing, what had disturbed the balance of the land. Some spoke of curses, others of bad omens, but none could place the blame. The villagers were at a loss, unsure of how to restore the river to its former state. Nana Kwaku, however, sensed that the river's stillness was not a mere natural occurrence. She could feel the imbalance in the land, the spiritual disturbance that had settled over Olanji like a heavy fog. The river's silence was not just the result of an earthly drought. It was a sign, a reflection of something deeper and darker that had taken root in the village. And in her heart, Nana Kwaku knew that the river's stillness was tied to Adama's suffering, a sign that the balance of the land had been disturbed by Kofi's greed and betrayal. The land, the spirits, and the river were all out of sync, waiting for the scales of justice to be tipped. But Adama remained silent, her faith in the spirits unwavering. She believed that the river would speak in its own time, that the balance would be restored when the moment was right. For now she could do nothing but wait. She could not force the river to flow, nor could she make the spirits act on her behalf. She had already given her suffering to the land. Now it was up to the river to respond. The days passed, and though the villagers continued to offer their sympathy, Adama said little. She would sit by the river, her thoughts far away, her connection to the land and the spirits stronger than ever. But the silence of the river weighed heavily on her heart, for she knew that the time for justice was near. And in the quiet of the night, she could almost hear the river stirring, as if preparing to claim its due. Kofi's life changed overnight. The gold he had stolen from his sister's sacrifice brought him instant fame and admiration among the villagers. They marveled at his newfound wealth, seeing him as a man blessed by the spirits, a symbol of prosperity. No one questioned the source of his riches, for Kofi had skillfully woven a tale of his own, a story of divine favor, of an encounter with a powerful spirit in the depths of the river. The villagers, eager to share in his success, treated him as a hero. They praised his cleverness, spoke of his good fortune, and showered him with respect. But for Kofi the gold was not enough. The wealth that had once seemed like the solution to all his problems now felt like a heavy burden, a weight he could not escape. His nights were filled with restless sleep, haunted by dreams of Adama. In the darkness of his slumber, he would hear her voice, soft, pleading, crying out for help. The sound of her screams echoed in his ears, but each time he tried to reach her, she slipped further away, her image dissolving into the mist of the river. And then, in the darkest corners of his dreams, he would see his own hand, the hand he had used to take from her, burning, consumed by an unnatural fire. The pain in these dreams was excruciating, as though his very soul was being scorched by the injustice he had done. But the worst part was the emptiness that followed, the cold, suffocating realization that he could never undo the damage he had caused. As the days passed, the nightmares grew more vivid, more relentless. Each night, Kofi would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart racing with fear and guilt. But it was not just the dreams that plagued him, it was the feeling of something watching him, something following him wherever he went. At first, he dismissed it as his own anxiety, a side effect of his guilty conscience. But soon he could no longer deny the strange, unsettling presence that seemed to hover around him. It was as if the land itself had grown hostile, as if the very earth beneath his feet was angry with him, rejecting him. And then one fateful morning Kofi woke to a new horror. He sat up in his bed, his body stiff with the lingering remnants of his nightmare, and glanced at his hand, the hand that had taken from his sister, the hand that had severed her innocence for the sake of gold. But to his shock, his hand was no longer there. He looked down at his wrist, his breath catching in his throat as he saw nothing but smooth, unbroken skin where his hand had once been. There was no blood, no wound, no sign of injury, only the chilling emptiness of a missing appendage. Panic surged through him. He screamed, his voice cracking with terror as he stared at the empty space where his hand had once been. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. He stumbled out of bed, falling to the floor as he tried to move, but his missing hand left him disoriented, his movements clumsy and erratic. He called out for help, his voice shaking, but there was no response. The silence in his house was deafening, the only sound the frantic thumping of his heart in his chest. Kofi's mind began to spiral, his thoughts tumbling over one another in a frantic blur. How could this be happening? How could his hand simply vanish without a trace? He knew deep down that this was no accident. This was no mere coincidence. He could feel the weight of his actions pressing down on him, the consequences of his betrayal closing in around him like a tightening noose. In his panic, Kofi rushed to the village, hoping for answers, hoping that someone could explain what had happened to him. But when he arrived, he found the villagers already murmuring, their voices filled with concern and fear. They had heard the stories, the whispers of Adama's suffering, the strange stillness of the river, the odd changes in the land. The village was in a state of unease, the once thriving community now plagued by an overwhelming sense of dread. When Kofi arrived at the elders' gathering, they looked at him with solemn eyes, their faces lined with years of wisdom and knowledge. The eldest of the elders, an ancient man named Naniama, spoke first. His voice was low and grave, carrying the weight of generations of ancestral knowledge. "The river spirit has claimed its due," he said, his words sending a shiver down Kofi's spine. The gold you took from the river, the offering you made in your greed, has come with a price. You have taken from the sacred, and now the river demands balance. Kofi's mind reeled as the words sank in. He had heard the stories of the river spirit before, tales of its power, of its ability to bless the pure-hearted with wealth, but also of its unforgiving nature. The spirit was not one to be trifled with, and Kofi had made the fatal mistake of believing he could outsmart it. He had taken from the river, but he had not understood the true cost of his actions. The gold, the wealth, the fame, all of it had come at the expense of something much greater. The river, the spirits, and the land had been offended, and now the price was being paid in full. The balance has been disturbed, Adama continued. The river is no longer flowing and the land is growing sick. The spirits of the ancestors are restless, and they will not rest until the scales are righted. You have taken from Adama, from the river, from the very heart of this land. And now the curse has begun. Kofi's heart sank as the full weight of his actions became clear. The curse was real. It had already begun and there was no escape. His hand, his very symbol of power and control, had been taken from him, vanished without a trace, as if the river itself had reached out and claimed what was rightfully its own. The punishment had started, and there was no way to undo the damage he had done. The villagers, though sympathetic, could do little to help him. They, too, understood that this was not a simple affliction. This was a divine retribution, a consequence of Kofi's greed. The elders spoke in hushed tones, their faces etched with sorrow and pity for the young man who had once seemed so prosperous, so full of potential. But now he was a cautionary tale, a symbol of what could happen when greed and betrayal took root in the heart of a man. As Kofi stood there, the cold wind biting at his skin, he felt the weight of his actions closing in around him. His hand was gone, but the emptiness it left behind was far greater. The curse had begun and there was no turning back. The air in the village grew heavy with anticipation. The elders had convened, their faces lined with the weight of generations past, their eyes shadowed with the understanding that the time had come for the truth to be revealed. Kofi's curse was not an isolated punishment. It was a sign, a warning from the spirits that the balance of the village had been disturbed in ways deeper than anyone could comprehend. The river had stopped flowing, crops withered in the fields, and the once vibrant land seemed to be dying. But it was not just Kofi who had angered the spirits. It was the entire village for failing to protect the innocent, for allowing greed and betrayal to take root within their midst. Adama, the spiritual leader of the village, stood in the center of the sacred grove, the spot where the ancestors were said to communicate with the living. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a faint whisper, as though the spirits themselves were already stirring. In her hands she held a bundle of sacred herbs, their smoke curling upward in the cool evening air. The ritual was ancient, passed down through countless generations, a way to commune with the spirits and seek their guidance in times of dire need. Adama's voice rose in prayer, invoking the spirits of the ancestors and calling upon the river spirit. She asked for clarity, for understanding, and for justice. The villagers gathered at the edge of the grove, watching in hushed silence, knowing that whatever revelations came from this ritual would shape the fate of their village. Kofi, now a shadow of the proud young man he had once been, stood near the back of the crowd, his face pale with guilt and fear. His hand was still missing, the curse he had brought upon himself a constant reminder of the gravity of his actions. As Adama continued her prayers, her eyes closed in deep concentration, the air around her began to shift. The wind picked up, swirling in unnatural patterns, and the smoke from the herbs danced in the air like ethereal spirits. The earth seemed to tremble beneath their feet, and for a moment the world stood still. Then, as if in answer to her call, the spirits began to speak. Visions filled Adama's mind, vivid and terrifying. She saw Kofi standing by the river, his hand raised in the dark night as he severed his sister's finger, offering it to the river spirit in exchange for gold. The vision shifted, showing the pain in Adama's eyes, the blood that flowed from her hand, and the betrayal that shattered the bond between siblings. But it was not just the act of cutting off her finger that angered the spirits, it was the blood sacrifice Kofi had made in the name of greed. In the vision, Adama saw the river spirit, a great and powerful being, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but a force of nature bound by ancient rules. The river spirit had demanded an offering, but Kofi had chosen the wrong path. Instead of offering something pure, something that would have restored balance, he had taken from his sister, stealing a part of her in exchange for gold. The gold, the wealth, had been a temporary blessing, but it came with a terrible cost. The balance of the land was disturbed, the spirits were angered, and the river had stopped flowing. But the vision did not end there. As the smoke thickened around Nana Ama, another scene unfolded. She saw not just Kofi but the village itself, its people standing by, unaware of the danger that lurked beneath the surface. The villagers had failed to protect the innocent. They had allowed the greed of one man to go unchecked, and in doing so they had allowed the curse to take root. The ancestors were not just angry with Kofi, they were angry with the village for its blindness, for failing to see the signs, for failing to act when the balance was first disturbed. The spirit's message was clear: this was not just Kofi's burden to bear. The village itself had failed, and now all would pay the price unless balance could be restored. Nana Ama's breath caught in her throat as the visions grew more intense, the air charged with an otherworldly energy. The spirits were not finished. They spoke in voices that echoed through her mind, their words ancient and weighty. The path to redemption is long, they intoned. The price for your actions must be paid. But there is a way to restore balance. You must seek the river's forgiveness. You must restore what was taken. Only then will the land heal and the river flow again. Kofi, his face pale and sweat-drenched, took a hesitant step forward. But how? He whispered, his voice barely audible. What must I do? The spirits did not answer him directly. Instead, the vision shifted once more, showing the river, once again flowing freely, its waters sparkling with life. But the river could not flow until the land had been healed, until the wrongs had been righted. The path to redemption would require more than just an apology. It would require a journey, a quest to restore what had been lost. Kofi would have to give up the gold he had stolen, the riches he had gained through his greed. He would have to return to the river, face the spirit, and offer something far greater than gold, his own blood, his own sacrifice to balance the scales. But the spirits also made it clear that this journey would not be Kofi's alone. The village as a whole would have to take part in the restoration of balance. They would have to come together to repair the bonds that had been broken, to restore their sense of community, and to protect the innocent. The elders, the healers, the villagers, all would need to contribute in some way to the restoration of harmony. The spirit of the river would not be appeased by one man's actions alone. It would take the combined efforts of all to heal the land and restore the flow of life. As the visions faded, Nana Ama opened her eyes, her face pale but resolute. She had seen the truth, the consequences of Kofi's greed, the anger of the spirits, and the path to redemption. But she also knew that the village had a choice to make. They could choose to ignore the spirit's warning, to allow the curse to continue unchecked, or they could choose to take action, to seek redemption and restore balance before more was lost. Nana Ama's voice was firm as she spoke to the gathered villagers. The ancestors have spoken. We must restore balance or the land will wither and die. The river spirit has claimed its due, but there is a way to make things right. It is not too late, but time is running out. The villagers stood in stunned silence, the weight of the words sinking in. The fate of their village rested in their hands. It was time for them to choose, to follow the path of redemption or to allow the curse to consume them all. Kofi stood before the villagers, his heart heavy with guilt and shame. The once proud young man who had been the center of attention, the one who had dazzled everyone with his newfound wealth, now found himself stripped of all honor. His hand, the symbol of his greed, had been taken from him, and in its place, a hollow, empty space remained. The villagers had heard the truth, the story of his betrayal, of how he had sacrificed his sister for gold, how he had traded her innocence for his own selfish desires. And now, the truth hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating him, leaving him with nothing but the cold, unforgiving stares of those he had once called his community. The elders had gathered, their faces stern as they looked upon Kofi. Nana Ama stood at the forefront, her gaze unwavering. Beside her, Adama stood, her face calm, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes, a deep, unspoken pain that seemed to ripple through the very air. The villagers waited in silence, the weight of what was to come pressing down on them all. Kofi's knees trembled as he stood there, his body bent under the weight of his own conscience. His mind raced, but there was nothing he could say to undo what he had done. No words could erase the cruelty he had inflicted upon his sister. No excuse could justify the horrors he had brought upon the village. All he could do was stand there, exposed and vulnerable, as the villagers prepared to pass judgment. "Speak, Kofi," Nana Ama's voice rang out, her words like a command, a final call for the truth to be laid bare. "Confess your wrongs, for the ancestors are watching." Kofi swallowed hard, his throat dry, his voice barely a whisper as he finally spoke, the words coming out in broken fragments. I took from her. I took her finger. I wanted gold. I wanted power. I thought it would make me happy. But I was wrong. I have nothing now. Nothing but the curse. His words were met with a heavy silence, the villagers exchanging glances, some shaking their heads, others lowering their eyes in sorrow. They had all known Kofi as a young man full of promise, full of potential. But now he was nothing but a cautionary tale, a symbol of the dangers of greed and betrayal. But it was Adama's reaction that struck everyone the hardest. Instead of anger, instead of revenge, she stepped forward, her movements graceful, almost otherworldly. Her face was serene, as if she had found a peace that Kofi could not yet comprehend. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a wisdom that transcended her years. "I do not seek revenge," Adama said, her voice calm but firm, echoing through the silent crowd. "I do not wish to see you suffer as I have suffered. The pain you have caused me is not something I wish upon anyone, but I do not want your destruction. I ask only for the healing of the land, for the river to flow again, for the crops to grow, for peace to return to our village." Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the fear and guilt that gripped Kofi's heart. He had expected her to be filled with rage, to call for his punishment, to demand that he suffer as she had suffered. But instead, she asked for healing, for the land to be restored, for the balance to be returned. It was a kindness that Kofi could not fathom, a generosity of spirit that made him feel even more wretched. The elders exchanged solemn glances before nodding in agreement. "Adama speaks wisdom," Nana Ama said. "You have caused great harm, Kofi, and the punishment must be just. But the path to redemption lies in the hands of the river spirit, and it is there you must go." Kofi's heart sank as he heard the elders' decree. The villagers began to murmur, their voices a low hum of concern and uncertainty. Kofi had no choice but to accept the fate that had been laid before him. He was to be sent into exile, a journey to seek redemption by serving the river spirit, to undo the damage he had caused. But this was no simple punishment. It was a trial, one that would test him in ways he could not yet understand. With a heavy heart, Kofi set out on his journey the next day, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and the gold he had stolen. His mind was clouded with guilt, but also with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what awaited him in the wilds, fear of the spiritual trials he would have to face. The path to the river was long and treacherous, winding through dense forests, over mountains and across barren plains. But the land seemed to turn against him, as if the earth itself rejected his presence. The first few days were the hardest. Kofi had grown accustomed to the comforts of village life, to the luxury that his gold had provided. But now he was alone in the wilderness, without food or water, struggling to survive. His mind began to play tricks on him. He heard whispers in the wind, voices calling his name, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. At night, he would lie awake in the dark, his body trembling, his eyes wide open as he stared into the emptiness, waiting for sleep to claim him. But sleep never came easily. His dreams were filled with visions of Adama's pain, of her blood flowing into the river, of the gold he had taken. And always, in the corner of his mind, was the haunting image of his missing hand, the hand that had taken from her, the hand that had sealed his fate. As the days wore on, Kofi's physical strength began to wane. The hardships of the journey had taken a toll on his body. He was gaunt and weak, his once proud frame now reduced to a shell of what it had been. His hands, the very hands that had betrayed his sister, were calloused and raw from the rough terrain. And the land, once so full of life, seemed to mock him at every turn. The river was no longer flowing, the earth was dry, and the animals had retreated into the shadows. The very world seemed to be dying, and Kofi was beginning to wonder if he too would perish before he reached the river's edge. It was during one of his darkest moments, when he could go no further, that the first of his spiritual trials began. One night, as he lay beside a small fire, exhausted and broken, he heard a rustling in the bushes. He sat up, his heart racing, but when he looked, there was nothing there. And then, in the flickering light of the fire, he saw it, a figure, cloaked in shadows, standing just beyond the circle of light. The figure was neither man nor spirit, but something in between. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its presence seemed to bend the very air around it. Kofi froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure spoke, its voice like the whisper of the wind, distant and yet all-encompassing. "You seek redemption," the figure said, its voice laced with ancient power. "But redemption comes at a price. You must face the pain of your actions, the consequences of your greed, and only then will you find the way forward." With those words, the figure disappeared into the night, leaving Kofi to face the first of many trials to come. He had a long way to go and the road ahead would not be easy. But the figure's words echoed in his mind, a reminder that true redemption would require more than just a journey of distance. It would require a journey of the soul. Kofi's journey through the wilderness had been long and grueling, testing every ounce of his resolve. His heart was heavy with the weight of his past actions, and his body bore the marks of the hardships he had endured. But as he approached the sacred river, the one he had once betrayed for gold, he knew this was the moment of truth. He had faced the trials set before him, and now he stood on the edge of his redemption, the river whispering to him as if calling him to make amends. The riverbank was eerily quiet when he arrived, the waters still, stagnant as if waiting for something. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and the trees above swayed gently, their leaves murmuring with the winds of change. Kofi stepped forward, his bare feet sinking into the cool mud, and knelt before the water's edge, his hands pressed to the ground. He had nothing left to offer except his own brokenness and the willingness to face the consequences of his actions. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the sky as Kofi began to speak, not words of apology, not the ones he had practiced over and over again in his mind, but a raw, heartfelt plea. He spoke to the river spirit, the entity that had once offered him wealth and now sought justice. He acknowledged his greed, his betrayal, and the suffering he had caused, not only to his sister but to the land and people he had once called family. He did not ask for forgiveness, for he knew that was not his to request. Instead he asked for balance to be restored, for the river to flow once again, and for the village to heal from the damage he had caused. As the last words left his lips, a soft breeze stirred the air, and the water before him rippled, a faint shimmer of light glistening beneath the surface. For a moment, Kofi thought it was his imagination playing tricks on him, but then he saw it, a figure rising from the depths of the river. The river spirit appeared, its form ethereal and majestic, its body shimmering with an otherworldly light. Its eyes, dark as the night sky, fixed on Kofi, and the very air seemed to pulse with power. The spirit's voice echoed in the space around them, ancient and deep. You have come seeking redemption, Kofi. The path you walked was one of darkness, but now you have chosen to face the light. The land, the river, and the spirits will not forget what you have done, but your heart has spoken true. With a graceful motion, the river spirit reached into the waters and from the depths, it pulled something shimmering. Kofi's breath caught in his throat as he saw what the spirit held in its hand, Adama's finger, whole and healed, glistening with a soft, golden light. The spirit spoke again, its voice both gentle and firm. Your greed has been repaid with loss, but your repentance has earned you a second chance. This is the balance of the universe, the river flows and the wound you caused can now heal. As the spirit held out the finger, Kofi felt a surge of emotion flood through him. He had caused this pain, this suffering, but now, before him, was a symbol of restoration. The finger was whole once more, no longer a part of Adama's lost innocence, but a part of something larger, the healing of the village, the restoration of balance. The spirit placed the finger in Kofi's trembling hands, and in that moment the waters of the river began to stir, slowly at first, then with increasing strength. The river, once stagnant and lifeless, began to flow again, its waters rushing over the banks, gleaming in the moonlight as they churned with renewed energy. The land seemed to breathe once more, the dry earth drinking deeply of the water, the plants stirring with life. It was as if the world itself had exhaled, the weight of its suffering lifting in a single, collective breath. Kofi's heart swelled with relief and gratitude, but it was only the beginning. The river spirit's form began to fade, its presence slipping back into the depths from which it had emerged. Before it disappeared completely, it left Kofi with one final message. Go now, Kofi. The village awaits you and the path of redemption lies ahead. Return the finger to Adama, and let her forgiveness be the final step in restoring peace. With that, the spirit vanished, leaving Kofi alone on the riverbank, the flowing waters a testament to the power of repentance and balance. Kofi stood there for a long time, gazing at the river, the weight of his journey settling into his bones. He had been given another chance and now it was up to him to make it right. He made his way back to the village, the night air cool against his skin. The journey felt different now, the weight of guilt had been lifted, but it was replaced with a new sense of purpose. He had learned that redemption was not something given lightly, nor was it something to be taken for granted. It was a hard-earned gift, one that required humility, sacrifice, and a willingness to change. As he walked through the village gates, the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, signaling the beginning of a new chapter. When Kofi arrived at the village square, the people gathered around, their faces a mixture of hope and curiosity. The elders stood at the front, their eyes wise and knowing, but it was Adama who caught his gaze first. She stood there, calm as always, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a quiet forgiveness that Kofi had not expected. He approached her slowly, the finger clutched tightly in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. "I have returned it to the river," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "And I bring this back to you, Adama." He held out her finger, whole and healed, and Adama reached for it, her fingers brushing against his. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. In that brief, silent exchange, Kofi understood. This was not just about restoring what had been broken, but about restoring the trust between them. Adama took the finger, holding it in her hands with reverence. There was no judgment in her gaze, no condemnation, only peace. The villagers gathered around them, and Nana Amma stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "Let us now cleanse the land, let us restore what was lost, and let us remember the lessons of this day. The river flows once again, and with it, our hearts are healed." The villagers held a cleansing ceremony by the river, offering prayers and songs to the spirits that had guided them through this trial. The waters flowed freely, washing away the remnants of greed and betrayal, leaving in its wake a sense of peace that had long been absent. Slowly the land began to heal. The crops grew once more, the animals returned to the forest, and the river sparkled with new life. Kofi had learned the hardest lesson of all, that greed could never bring true wealth, and that the most valuable thing one could possess was not gold, but the peace of the land and the love of family. With the river flowing again, so too did the healing of the village. And though the road to redemption had been long and fraught with pain, Kofi had finally found his way back to the heart of what truly mattered. Years passed, and the village of Olanji slowly recovered from the trials it had faced. The land bloomed once more, the river flowed freely, and the people, though scarred, had learned valuable lessons. Adama, once a young woman filled with innocence and pain, had become a spiritual guide, a voice of wisdom, calm, and strength. Her journey from suffering to healing had transformed her, and now she dedicated her life to teaching the youth of the village the most important lessons she had learned. She gathered the children by the river every year, near the spot where the water had once ceased to flow, telling them stories of the ancient spirits that watched over the land. But above all, she taught them about respect. Respect for one another, for the earth, and for the delicate balance of nature that sustains life. The lessons were simple but profound. To never let greed overshadow the greater good, to always protect those who are vulnerable, and to be mindful of the sacrifices others made to ensure peace and prosperity. Her teachings were always punctuated by the story of her own suffering, of how her brother, blinded by gold, had betrayed her in the most cruel and heartless way. But more than just a tale of vengeance, Adama shared the lesson of forgiveness, redemption, and the price of greed. She reminded the youth that the river's power was not just a gift, but a responsibility, one that had to be honored with pure hearts and good intentions. "The river flows with life," she would say, "and with that life comes a responsibility to nurture, not to take." As the years went by, the memory of Kofi's betrayal and punishment began to fade into the background, becoming more of a whispered legend than a painful reality. Kofi himself was never seen again. Some said he had wandered off into the wilderness, seeking redemption and solace, while others believed that the river spirit had claimed him, as it had taken his hand. But the truth of his fate mattered little to the people of Olanji. They no longer mourned him, for they had learned that there was no room in their village for greed, deceit, or those who sought to harm others for personal gain. But Kofi's story, his punishment, and his ultimate disappearance were not forgotten. Every year, the villagers held a special ceremony by the river, honoring the spirits and giving thanks for the balance that had been restored. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They offered prayers and songs, asking for guidance and protection for the coming year. And as part of the ritual, they would retell the story of Kofi and Adama, the story of how greed had led to a brother's fall and a sister's rise, the story of how a finger that had been sacrificed had brought healing to an entire village. The retelling of the story became a tradition, passed down through generations, reminding each new crop of villagers of the importance of humility and honor. Every child in Olanji grew up hearing the tale of Kofi's lost hand and Adama's unbroken spirit, and they understood the moral that lay at the heart of it. Greed would always lead to ruin, but kindness and forgiveness could restore even the deepest wounds. As Adama aged, her teachings became more deeply woven into the fabric of the village. She would often sit by the river, watching the waters flow, and reflect on the journey she had taken. She had healed not just from the physical loss of her finger, but from the emotional scars Kofi's betrayal had left behind. She no longer carried the weight of that pain. Instead, she carried the knowledge that healing, both personal and communal, could only come through compassion and understanding. The youth of Olanji came to her for guidance, not just in matters of the spirit but in everyday life. They asked her how to deal with jealousy, how to overcome hardship, how to be a person of integrity in a world that often tempted them with the lure of quick wealth and easy answers. And Adama, always patient and wise, would share with them her story and the lessons she had learned. Lessons she had learned the hard way, but ones that had shaped her into the woman and guide she was today. And so, every year the villagers honored the river, and every year they told the tale of Kofi and Adama, a story of greed, betrayal, punishment, and ultimately healing. It became a part of their collective consciousness, a cautionary tale woven into the very fabric of their culture. The river, with its life-giving waters, became a symbol of renewal, of the power of forgiveness and the strength that comes from accepting responsibility for one's actions. But the story did not just live on in the rituals of the village. It lived on in the hearts of the people, in the way they treated one another, in the way they respected the land, and in the way they honored the ancestors. It was a story that taught them that even in their darkest moments, there was a way forward, a path toward redemption, if only they had the courage to take it. As the years went by, the tale of Kofi's lost hand became more than just a lesson for the villagers. It became a story of transformation, a reminder that the hand that took without honor would eventually be taken, and the finger that had suffered would give birth to healing. It was a story that shaped the identity of Olanji, a village that had learned the importance of balance, respect, and the price of greed. And so, the lesson of Kofi and Adama lives on, passed from one generation to the next, reminding all who hear it of the power of the river, the strength of the spirit, and the wisdom that comes from living with integrity and honor.